trust me?" the businessman whispered on their wedding night. Those 3 words echoed in the silence of the room like an ancient secret, laden with promises Marina didn't yet know how to decipher. She stood there, before the wide windows of the apartment in Kensington Gardens, watching the lights of London blink in the distance like lost fireflies in the immensity of the metropolis. 22 years newly completed. A simple white linen dress she had hastily chosen in a discreet boutique in Notting Hill, and on her shoulders, the crushing weight of a decision that would change everything. The wedding had been celebrated that same afternoon, in an intimate ceremony at the Westminster Registry Office. Only the mandatory witnesses, a justice of the peace who barely lifted his eyes from the papers, and the awkward silence of someone who knows that this isn't exactly what it should be. There were no flowers, no music, no family. Hers was too far away, drowning in debts that seemed to multiply like weeds in an abandoned field. His, well, he never mentioned family. He only said when he signed the contract that he had been alone long enough to forget what it was like to have someone. The contract. Marina still felt the weight of that document in her hands, even hours after having put it away in her purse. 12 pages printed on letterhead, each clause drafted with the impeccable coldness of someone who transforms feelings into legal paragraphs. 12 months of cohabitation. At the end of this period, total freedom. No losses, no debts, no obligations. The words danced in her mind like a disturbing nursery rhyme. It was an agreement. Only that. Nothing more than that. But then why was her heart beating like that, out of sync, restless, as if it sensed that the signed papers didn't contain the whole truth? Roderick Alistair Sandon, 43 years old, heir to a textile empire that began in the weaving mills of rural Yorkshire and spread across the entire country, from the garment factories of Manchester to the luxury stores of the most expensive shopping malls in Washington, D.C. and New York City. A man of austere appearance, impeccably combed grey hair, tailor-made suits that looked like elegant armor, and brown eyes that carried an ancient sadness, the kind that money or power cannot cure. Marina had met him only 6 weeks earlier, in an unexpected meeting mediated by a lawyer who also represented her family's interests. At the time, the proposal sounded absurd, insane, impossible. Marry a stranger, live under the same roof as a man 21 years older, someone who could be mistaken for a paternal figure, if not for the too intense, too disturbing gaze he cast upon her whenever he thought Marina wasn't paying attention. The idea initially revolted her, but then came the bills, the collection letters, the despair etched on her mother's face, who hadn't slept properly for months. Her father, a proud man who had spent his life building a small chain of bakeries in the home counties, watching everything crumble after a financial scam he could never quite explain to his family. Marina had recently graduated in architecture from Central St. Martin's. She worked part-time at a small office in Canary Wharf, where she spent her days designing residential interior projects and dreaming of a career that had barely begun. Her salary barely covered the rent of her own apartment, a cramped studio flat in Bloomsbury. When the lawyer placed the papers on the table and explained the terms, Marina wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream. She wanted to storm out. But she did none of that, because the proposal included the full payment of her family's debts. All of them. Down to the last penny. And more, a generous sum deposited into an account in her name available immediately, without any restrictions. Enough money to start over, to breathe, to not wake up in the middle of the night with the tightness in her chest of someone who knows the ground can give way at any moment. In return, 12 months. Only that. 1 year of her life. There were no explicit demands. The contract was clear about that. Respectful cohabitation, public appearances when necessary, absolute discretion. No clause mentioned physical intimacy. No line suggested obligations beyond presence, companionship. The illusion of a marriage that to the eyes of the world should appear real. At the end of the term, an amicable divorce. Each would go their separate way, end. Marina read the contract 3 times. Then she asked for a week to think. Roderick did not insist. He only said with that deep, controlled voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him that he would respect any decision she made, and that if she accepted, he promised she wouldn't regret it. During that week, Marina barely ate, barely slept. She talked to her mother, who cried and said she would never ask such a thing of her daughter, but also didn't know what else to do. She talked to her best friend Julia, who looked at her as if she had gone mad and said it was something out of a movie, that real people didn't make deals like that. But Marina knew that real people did much worse things when necessity pressed. She knew college classmates who had given up on their dreams to work in jobs they hated. She knew people who had married for convenience, for status, for fear of being alone. At least here there was honesty. A contract, clear rules, and a defined exit. On the 7th day, she called the lawyer and said she accepted. 2 days later, she was at the registry office dressed in white, signing papers that made her Marina Alastair Sandon. Now, there in that silent and immense apartment, with its 6 bedrooms, a library that occupied an entire wing, a professional kitchen that looked more like a magazine set, and a privileged view of Hyde Park, Marina felt like she was on another planet. Everything was too big, too silent, too tidy. There were no personal marks on the walls, no photographs, nothing to indicate that someone actually lived there. It looked like a showroom, an exhibition space, beautiful, impeccable, and completely devoid of soul. Trust me. The words returned, persistent. Marina turned slowly. Roderick was a few steps away, still wearing the dark grey suit he had worn for the ceremony, but his tie was already loose, the first buttons of his shirt undone. He held 2 wine glasses, one in each hand, and offered one to her with a restrained, almost shy gesture. Shy. The word sounded strange applied to a man like him, but it was the only one that seemed appropriate at that moment. She accepted the glass. Her fingers brushed briefly against his, and Marina felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something more complex, a mixture of nervousness and curiosity, and a strange feeling that she was about to discover something about herself that she didn't yet know existed. "You don't need to be nervous," Roderick said, his voice low, almost a murmur. "I know this is all strange. I know you must be wondering what the hell you're doing here, but I promise I will respect every word of the contract. You have my word." Marina took a sip of the wine. It was a full-bodied, velvety red, probably very expensive. She didn't know much about wines, but she knew how to recognize quality when she tasted it, just as she knew how to recognize when someone was being sincere. And as absurd as the whole situation was, there was something in Roderick's eyes that made her believe him. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. The question came out unbidden, raw, direct. "Why did you make this proposal specifically to me? You don't even know me." Roderick averted his gaze. It was a quick, almost imperceptible movement, but Marina noticed. He walked to the window, stood there with the glass in his hand, observing the city below. He took so long to answer that Marina thought he would simply ignore the question. But then he spoke. "I saw you once," he said. "About 6 months ago. You were presenting a project at the city council for the revitalization of a square in Greenwich. I was there for another reason, a meeting about licenses for a new factory. I passed by the hall where you were and heard you speaking. You were nervous, you could tell. But you were also passionate about what you were doing. You spoke of that public space as if a child was speaking of a dream, with so much enthusiasm, so much life, so much certainty that it was worth fighting for. And I can't even remember the last time I felt that kind of passion for anything." Marina remained silent. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected anything like that. "I started paying attention," Roderick continued, still not looking at her. "Not in an invasive way, not the way you're thinking. But I learned your name. I learned you worked in Canary Wharf. And when your family's situation arose, when my lawyer mentioned there was a young architect in urgent need of help, well, I asked if it was you." Marina felt the ground give way slightly beneath her feet. He knew. From the beginning, he knew. "You chose me," she said, her voice tight. "It wasn't by chance. It wasn't a coincidence." "No," Roderick confirmed, finally turning to face her. "It wasn't, and I know that changes everything. I know you must be feeling manipulated, used, I don't know. But the truth is I couldn't stand the loneliness anymore. I couldn't stand living in this huge apartment, this huge life, without anyone to share even a breakfast with. And when I saw you, when I heard you speak like that, I thought that maybe, just maybe, you could bring some life back to this place. To me." There was a vulnerability in those words that Marina hadn't expected. Roderick Alistair Sandon, the ruthless businessman, the man who had built an empire with his own hands, was there in front of her, admitting he was alone, that he needed someone, that he had chosen her not out of whim, but out of desperation. Marina didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to be furious. She wanted to scream that it was invasive, that he had no right to decide her life like that. But another part, a smaller, more honest part, understood. Because she was also desperate. She had also accepted that agreement out of desperation. Deep down they were both castaways, clinging to the same piece of wood, floating in a too dark ocean. 12 months, Marina said finally. Only that. After that, each goes their own way. 12 months, Roderick repeated, agreeing. And from his gaze, Marina had the strange feeling that neither of them truly believed that. The following days were about adaptation. Roderick insisted that Marina choose one of the bedrooms for herself, a space just for her, where she could feel at ease without feeling like she was invading his territory. She chose the room with the best natural light, the one whose windows overlooked a row of jacaranda trees that, in spring, exploded in purple flowers and made the morning sky look like a painting. She brought her few belongings from her Bloomsbury apartment: clothes, architecture books, a collection of plants she cared for lovingly, some family photographs she hung on the wall. Roderick did not interfere. On the contrary, he offered help. He hired a small team to handle the move, paid for the termination of her old lease, arranged everything without fuss, without expecting thanks. Marina realized he acted this way in everything. Discreet, efficient, almost invisible. It was as if he was afraid of taking up too much space in her life, as if he feared that any sudden movement could make her flee. They established a silent routine. Roderick woke early, always before 6 in the morning, and went to his office, a company based in the City of London. He returned in the late afternoon, sometimes carrying folders full of documents, other times just too tired to talk much. Marina continued working at the architectural office, took the Underground every day, returned in the late afternoon, and locked herself in her room to draw, study, or simply lie on the ceiling and wonder what the hell she was doing there. But things began to change, not all at once. Not dramatically. It was a slow, almost imperceptible process, like the changing seasons in London, where summer slipped into autumn without anyone noticing until the leaves were already on the ground. It started with dinners. Roderick began to arrive home earlier, and one of those afternoons he found Marina in the kitchen trying to prepare a risotto. She wasn't exactly a talented cook, and the risotto was threatening to turn into a sticky paste. Roderick came in, dropped his briefcase on the counter, took off his jacket, rolled up his shirt sleeves and said, with a half-smile Marina had never seen on him before, that she was doing everything wrong. "Let me show you," he said, gently taking the wooden spoon from her hand. Marina stepped back, somewhat unsure of what to do, and watched him as he stirred the rice, gradually added broth, explained the importance of not rushing the process. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, with a quiet confidence, as if that were the most natural place in the world for him to be. She found herself observing his hands, large, strong, but surprisingly delicate in handling the ingredients. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked. "From my grandmother," Roderick replied without taking his eyes off the pan. "She had a farm in rural Yorkshire. I spent many summers there as a child. She used to say that a man who doesn't know how to cook is a man who doesn't know how to live." Marina smiled. It was the first time he had mentioned anything about his family, about his past. It seemed like a door opening, just a crack, but enough for her to glimpse a little of what was on the other side. The risotto was perfect. They ate together at the kitchen table, not in the formal dining room that looked like it came out of a luxury furniture catalogue. They talked about small things, about London's chaotic traffic, about the project Marina was developing at work, a renovation of an old townhouse in Hampstead, about Roderick's plans to expand the company to the northeast. They weren't deep conversations, but they were real. And when Marina went up to her room that night, she realized that for the first time since she had arrived there, she hadn't felt alone. It happened again. Not every day, but often enough to become a habit. Roderick started coming home earlier. Sometimes they cooked together. Other times he just stayed nearby while she worked on a drawing, reading a book, or answering emails on her laptop. On weekends he invited her for walks. Together they explored Regent's Park, Richmond Park, even ventured on a trail in the Peak District on a sunny Sunday morning. Roderick told stories about the company, about the challenges of maintaining a family business without family to share the burden. Marina talked about her dreams, about her desire to one day have her own office, to design spaces that truly mattered to people. And little by little, without either of them quite realizing it, the distance between them began to diminish. It was on a rainy May afternoon that everything changed for good. Marina was in the library, flipping through an old book on modern British architecture she had found on one of the shelves, when something fell out from between the pages. A photograph. Old, faded, its edges yellowed by time. She picked it up from the floor and stared at it, trying to understand what she saw. It was a woman. Young, beautiful dark hair tied in an elegant bun, a party dress, a wide, confident smile on her face. She was in some kind of ballroom, the background blurred, but you could see other people around, lights, movement, life. There was something in her pose, in the way she held the hem of her dress with one hand, that suggested she was about to dance. Or perhaps she was already dancing when the photo was taken. Marina turned the photograph over. On the back, elegant handwriting in almost faded blue ink. Summer of 2005. Gala Ball, Clarissa, Clarissa. The name echoed in Marina's mind like a distant bell. She didn't know why, but something about that name, that photograph, disturbed her deeply. She stood there holding the portrait, feeling she had stumbled upon something she shouldn't have found. Her secret, an old wound. She heard footsteps in the corridor. Roderick entered the library carrying a cup of coffee, and when he saw what Marina was holding, he stopped. His face instantly closed like a door slamming shut. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice tense. "It fell out of the book," Marina replied, showing the still open volume on the table. "Who is she?" Roderick didn't answer immediately. He crossed the library, took the photograph from Marina's hand with excessive care, as if he were handling something extremely fragile. He looked at the image for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. "Someone who no longer exists," he said finally. "At least not to me." Marina felt she should stop there, that she should respect his silence, let the subject die before it even began. But something stronger compelled her. "She was important to you," Marina stated. It wasn't a question. "She was," Roderick admitted, and his voice came out tired, heavy. "She was everything. At least I thought she was." The silence that followed was dense, laden with unsaid things. Marina waited. And little by little, like a dam finally yielding to pressure, Roderick began to speak. "Clarissa and I met almost 20 years ago. I was 24, she was 22. The same age you are now, incidentally. Funny how life repeats certain patterns, isn't it? She was a dancer. Not professional, but she danced as if she was born for it. I met her at a charity event, one of those boring dinners where businessmen pretend they care about social causes. She was there because her dance company was going to perform. And when she stepped onto the stage, Marina, I had never seen anything like it. It was as if the rest of the world disappeared. There was only her, the music, and that mesmerizing movement." He paused, took a sip of his already cold coffee, and continued. "We were together for 5 years. We lived together. I planned to marry her. I bought a ring, booked a trip to the Hamptons, had a whole ridiculous romantic plan in my head. But a week before the trip, she told me she was leaving, that she had received an offer to dance in Paris, that it was the chance of a lifetime for her, and that she loved me, but not enough to stay." His voice trembled slightly on the last sentence. Marina felt her chest tighten. "I let her go," Roderick continued, "because it was the right thing to do. Because you don't hold back someone who wants to fly. But it destroyed me in a way I didn't know was possible. I spent years trying to understand what I had done wrong, why I wasn't enough, why my love wasn't enough, and in the end I simply gave up. I gave up trying. I gave up believing that I could have that again. I built walls so high around myself that I couldn't even get through them anymore." Marina didn't know what to say. There was such deep pain in those words that she felt as if she were looking at an open, exposed wound, still bleeding after so many years. "You still think about her," Marina said. Softly. "Not the way you imagine," Roderick replied. "I don't feel anything for her anymore. Neither love nor anger nor resentment. Just a vague sadness, as if she were a ghost I carry unintentionally. And for a long time I thought I would die. Like that. Alone, surrounded by things, but empty inside. He looked at Marina then, and there was something different in his gaze. Something she couldn't name. "Until I saw you at that presentation," he said, "and for the first time in years I felt that maybe there was still a chance, not to repeat the past, but to build something new, something different, something real." Marina felt tears threatening to rise, but she held them back. She didn't know what she felt. Compassion, empathy, or something more dangerous, something she shouldn't be feeling for a man with whom she only had a contract, a temporary agreement, a sham. "Thank you for listening," Roderick said, putting the photograph in the inside pocket of his jacket. "Sorry for dumping all that on you. It wasn't my intention." "It's okay," Marina replied. And it was true. It was okay. In fact, for the first time since she had arrived there, she felt she was beginning to understand who the man she shared that immense, silent space with really was. That night, Marina couldn't sleep. She stayed awake late, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Clarissa, about Roderick, about contracts and wounds that never quite heal. She thought about her own life, about the choices that had brought her there, and for the first time she wondered if maybe, just maybe, 12 months weren't enough time to heal someone, or to lose herself completely. The following weeks brought a subtle but undeniable transformation. Marina began to notice that the apartment, previously cold and impersonal like a showroom, was coming to life. Not just because of the plants she had scattered in the corners, or the colorful cushions she had bought at a craft fair at Portobello Road Market, but because of something deeper, more intangible. It was as if her presence there had awakened the place from an ancient sleep, restoring a pulse that had long been lost. Roderick had also changed, or perhaps Marina was finally managing to see him beyond the polished surface, beyond the armor of a successful businessman he wore every day before leaving for work. She discovered that he had a habit of waking before dawn and standing on the balcony with a cup of coffee, observing the still sleeping city, as if searching for some answer in the distant blinking lights. She discovered that he read poetry secretly, ashamed to admit that he kept a collection of Wordsworth, Shelley, and even some books by Maya Angelou in a locked desk drawer. She discovered that he hummed softly while cooking, old folk songs his mother used to play on the guitar, as he confessed one Sunday afternoon while they prepared a spectacular seafood stew together. It was these small discoveries that began to erode the barriers Marina had built around her heart. She found herself waiting to hear the key turning in the lock in the late afternoon, eager to tell him about her day, about the annoying client who couldn't decide between 2 shades of beige, about the idea she had had to transform an underutilized office space into a common area. And Roderick listened. He really listened, not with that distracted attention of someone who is just being polite, but with genuine interest, asking questions, offering suggestions, celebrating her small victories as if they were his own. Julia was the first to notice the change. They met one Saturday afternoon at Westfield, London, and while they had coffee at one of the cafes, her friend observed her with that penetrating gaze that had known Marina since school days. "You're different," Julia said, stirring the sugar in her cappuccino with slow, thoughtful movements. "I can't explain exactly what, but you are. Lighter, more present, as if you finally stopped carrying the world on your shoulders." Marina smiled but averted her gaze. "I'm just adapting," she replied, her voice less convincing than she intended. "Adapting," Julia repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Mari, I've known you for 15 years. This isn't adaptation. This is something else. You're falling for him, aren't you?" The question fell between them like a stone thrown into a calm lake. Marina felt her face flush. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to laugh and say Julia was crazy, that it was just an agreement, a temporary contract, that in a few months it would all end and she would go on with her life as planned. But the words didn't come out, because the truth Marina had been trying to ignore for weeks, was that yes, she was starting to fall for him. And it wasn't just liking him in a casual sense, in the sense of appreciating someone's company. It was something deeper, more dangerous. It was waking up in the middle of the night and missing his voice. It was smiling alone, remembering a silly joke he had made at dinner. It was imagining what it would be like if that contract didn't exist, if that 12-month deadline wasn't there, counting down like a time bomb about to blow everything up. "I don't know what I'm feeling," Marina admitted finally. "It's all very confusing, Ju. Some days I wake up and think this is crazy, that I'm letting myself be carried away by a fantasy that isn't real. But then he does something, anything, like bringing me coffee just the way I like it without me asking, or leaving a note stuck to the fridge saying he left dinner ready because he knew I'd be home late from work, and I don't know. I just don't know." Julia reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're falling in love, Mari, and it's okay to be scared of it, but it's also okay to allow yourself to feel, even if it's for a limited time. Even if it hurts later, sometimes we need to take a risk." Marina nodded, but inside she knew it wasn't that simple, because she already knew pain. She already knew disillusionment. She already knew what it was like to place expectations on something and watch everything crumble. And the idea of going through that again, especially with someone who had made it clear from the beginning that it had an expiration date, was terrifying. But the heart, Marina was discovering, doesn't follow contracts. It doesn't respect clauses. It doesn't care about expiration dates. That same night when she returned to the apartment, Marina found Roderick in the kitchen, but something was different. He wasn't cooking. He wasn't reading. He wasn't doing any of the things he usually did. He was just standing, leaning against the counter with a glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze lost on some distant point on the wall. There was a tension in his shoulders, a rigidity in his posture that she didn't recognize. "Did something happen?" Marina asked, dropping her purse on a chair and approaching slowly. Roderick drank the rest of the whiskey in one gulp, placed the glass in the sink with more force than necessary. The sound echoed in the silence of the kitchen like a gunshot. "I received a call today," he said, his voice strangely controlled, as if he were making an immense effort not to let his emotions overflow. "From someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Someone I thought I'd never speak to again." Marina felt her stomach clench. "Her?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Her," Roderick confirmed. "Clarissa is back in the UK and she wants to see me." The silence that followed was deafening. Marina stood there processing the information, trying to understand what she felt. Jealousy? Fear? Anger? It was all of that mixed together in a confusion of emotions she didn't know how to name. "Are you going?" she managed to ask, her voice weaker than she would have liked. Roderick finally looked at her, and there was something in his eyes Marina had never seen before. Vulnerability, uncertainty, as if he himself didn't know the answer to that question. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to tell her to go to hell. Wants to say she had almost 20 years to show up, and now I have no interest in reliving the past. But another part, a foolish, nostalgic part, wants to know, wants to understand, wants to hear what she has to say after all this time." Marina bit her lip, fighting the urge to simply scream that he shouldn't go, that that woman had already caused enough pain, that looking back never brought anything good. But it wasn't her place to decide that. She didn't have that right. After all, what they had was an agreement, a contract. Nothing more than that, right? "Then go," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Go and resolve this once and for all, because as long as she's an unresolved ghost, you'll never truly be able to move on." Roderick stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to decipher some hidden code in her words. Then slowly he nodded. "You're right," he said, "as always." But Marina didn't feel certain of anything. She felt, in fact, as if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Roderick scheduled the meeting with Clarissa for the following Tuesday at a sophisticated restaurant in Mayfair. He told Marina about it at breakfast on Monday, almost as if commenting on the weather, and she just nodded, pretending to be too focused on spreading jam on her toast to care. But inside she was falling apart. She spent that entire day at work unable to concentrate. She miscalculated measurements on a project, had to redo drawings twice, and when her boss asked if everything was all right, she just smiled and said she hadn't slept well. Which was true, by the way. She had spent the previous night awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining what that meeting would be like. Imagining Clarissa, beautiful and elegant as in the photograph, sitting opposite Roderick. Imagining him looking at her with that look of someone rediscovering something they thought was lost forever. On Tuesday, Marina left work early with the excuse of a doctor's appointment and went straight home. She took a long bath, put on comfortable clothes, tried to read a book, watch television, do anything to distract herself, but nothing worked. The clock on the wall seemed to be moving in slow motion, each second an eternity. Roderick returned at 10 o'clock that night. Marina was in the living room, pretending to read an issue of AU magazine she had already read 3 times. She heard the key in the door, the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, and her heart pounded. When he entered the room, Marina looked up and felt her stomach churn. Roderick was pale, his eyes red, his face carrying an expression she couldn't decipher. He threw his keys on the coffee table, loosened his tie and sank onto the sofa beside her with a long, tired sigh. "How was it?" Marina asked, putting the magazine away, turning to him. Roderick remained silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he began to speak, his voice hoarse, heavy. "She's different. Older, obviously. But it's not just that. It's like she's a completely different person from the one I knew. She said her dancing career didn't work out, that she stayed in Paris for 7 years, but never managed to stabilize, never got the opportunities she expected. She returned to the UK 5 years ago, married a real estate businessman, a much older man than her. Rich. Powerful. The marriage lasted 3 years and ended last year. Complicated divorce, fight over money, all that depressing story." He paused, ran his hands over his face. "She said she thought of me all these years. That she never forgot what we had. That she regrets leaving. And that now, finally free, she wanted to try again. She wanted to see if there was still something between us." Marina felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "And what did you say?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling. "That no," Roderick said, turning to look her directly in the eyes. "That it was too late. That the person she knew no longer exists. That I changed. That life changed. And that even if there were any remnants of feeling, it wouldn't be fair to relive something that died so long ago." Marina let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She felt such immense relief that it almost hurt. But along with the relief came guilt. Guilt for feeling happy about someone else's suffering. Guilt for internally celebrating the fact that Roderick had rejected his ex. Guilt for wanting something she had no right to want. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. Roderick took a moment to answer. When he did, there was a raw sincerity in his words that cut Marina like a sharp blade. "Relieved," he said, "and also confused, because I spent so many years thinking that if she came back, if she gave me a second chance, I would accept without a second thought. But when she was there in front of me, saying all the things I had dreamed of hearing for almost 20 years, I felt nothing. No desire to go back, no desire to recover what we lost, just a vague sadness for the wasted time. And do you know why?" Marina shook her head, unable to speak, because I finally understood that what I felt for her wasn't love. It was attachment. It was fear. It was the pathetic need to prove to myself that I was capable of being loved. But real love, the kind that transforms you, that makes you want to be a better person, that scares you and completes you at the same time. I never had that with her. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was so low that Marina almost didn't hear him. "But I'm starting to understand what it is. For the first time in my life, I'm starting to understand." Marina felt tears burn in her eyes. She knew he wasn't speaking directly, but she also knew those words were for her, and she wanted to believe them. She wanted so desperately to believe that this wasn't all just an illusion, a fantasy built upon a cold, impersonal contract. But she was afraid. So afraid. "Roderick," she began, her voice faltering, "I need to tell you something." He turned to her, attentive. Marina took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared of what I'm feeling. Scared that this is all just temporary. Scared that when the contract ends, we'll just walk away and pretend none of this happened. And I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can pretend you mean nothing to me." Roderick was silent for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched her face, his thumb caressing her cheek with a delicacy that made Marina's heart pound. "Who said we have to pretend?" he whispered. "Who said we have to follow the contract just because we signed it? Marina, I know we started this the wrong way. I know I put you in an impossible position, that I was selfish and manipulative in choosing you without you knowing. But what's happening now, what I'm feeling now, has nothing to do with contracts or agreements or deadlines. It's real. It's more real than anything I've ever felt in my life." Marina felt the tears finally stream down. Roderick wiped them away with his thumb, his eyes fixed on hers. "Give me a chance," he pleaded. A real chance. Not as part of an agreement, but as two people who are discovering something new, something scary, but also wonderful. "Let me prove that this can be more than just 12 months. Marina couldn't respond with words. So she simply leaned in and kissed him. It was a soft kiss at first, hesitant as if both were testing unknown ground. But then something broke between them, all the barriers they had erected crumbling at once, and the kiss deepened, became urgent, desperate, full of all the repressed desire of the past few weeks. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Roderick rested his forehead on hers, his eyes closed. "This changes everything," he whispered. "I know," Marina replied, "and it's okay." That night they talked until dawn. Lying on the living room sofa, wrapped in a blanket, they shared secrets, fears, dreams they had never told anyone. Roderick spoke about the loneliness that consumed him after Clarissa left, about how he had sought refuge in work because it was the only place where he felt in control, where the rules were clear and disappointments predictable. Marina spoke about the pressure of being an only child, about the weight of carrying family expectations, about the constant fear of not being good enough, of not being able to build something that truly mattered in the world. And little by little, as London awoke outside, with the distant rumble of traffic beginning to fill the streets, they rediscovered each other, not as the businessman and the architect, not as the millionaire and the girl who accepted a desperate agreement, but as Roderick and Marina, two imperfect people, hurt, scared, but willing to try. The days that followed were different. Not in the sense that everything turned into a perfect fairy tale, but in the sense that there was a new honesty between them, a complicity that hadn't existed before. Roderick started coming home earlier, refusing business dinners and meetings that extended late. Marina began to leave her drawings scattered around the house, marking territory, transforming that impersonal space into something that finally felt like a home. They cooked together, argued about who would do the dishes, watched bad movies on television and laughed at silly jokes. Roderick took her to visit the factory in Yorkshire, and Marina was fascinated by the fabric production process, by the old machines that still worked perfectly, by the employees who had known Roderick since he was a child and told embarrassing stories about him that made him blush. Marina took him to meet her family, and despite initial nervousness, the meeting was better than she expected. Her mother cried with emotion. Her father shook Roderick's hand firmly and thanked him, without needing to say why. But not everything was rosy. There were moments of tension, of doubt, of fear. Marina sometimes woke up in the middle of the night and looked at Roderick sleeping beside her on the sofa, where they had both dozed off during a movie, and wondered if it was real, or if she would wake up and discover she had dreamed it all. Roderick, in turn, had bouts of insecurity. Moments when the age difference between them bothered him, when he wondered if he wasn't being selfish by holding on to a woman so young, so full of life, to someone like him. It was during one of these crises that everything almost fell apart. It was a Friday night. They had plans to have dinner out at a new restaurant in Notting Hill that Marina was dying to try. But when Roderick arrived home, something was wrong. Marina noticed immediately. He was tense, distant, avoiding her gaze. "Did something happen?" she asked, putting down the book she was reading. Roderick stood in the middle of the living room, his hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. He took so long to answer that Marina felt fear begin to spread through her chest. "I had a meeting today," he said finally, "with my lawyer. He reminded me that the contract expires in 3 months, that we need to start preparing the divorce papers, that there are bureaucratic issues that need to be resolved." Marina felt the ground give way beneath her feet. The contract. How could she have forgotten the damned contract? "And you want to do that?" she asked, her voice stronger than she expected. "You want to start preparing the divorce?" Roderick finally looked at her, and there was so much pain in his eyes that Marina felt like crying. "I don't know what I want," he admitted. "Marina, I'm 43 years old. You're 22. I've lived, I've made mistakes, I've been hurt. But you're just starting. You have a brilliant..." Career ahead of you, you have dreams, you have a whole life still, and I'm afraid I'm holding you back. I'm afraid that in 5-10 years, you'll wake up and realize you wasted the best years of your life with someone who didn't deserve it." The anger Marina felt was so intense that it surprised her. She got up from the sofa, crossed the room, and stood before him, her eyes burning. "Do you know what your problem is, Roderick? You want to protect me from everything, even from myself. You want to decide what's best for me, as if I were incapable of making my own choices. But you know what? I've already made my choice. I chose to be here. I chose you. Not because of a contract, not because of money, not out of obligation, but because I want to, because I love you." The words came out before she could stop them, and the moment they were spoken, filling the space between them like a declaration impossible to ignore, Marina knew they were true. She loved that man, loved him with an intensity that scared her and completed her at the same time. Roderick was silent, his eyes wide as if he had been struck by lightning. "You love me?" he repeated, his voice an incredulous whisper. "I do," Marina confirmed, tears finally escaping. "And if you love me too, then stop trying to push me away just because you're scared. Face that fear with me. We face it together." Roderick didn't answer with words. He simply pulled her into such a tight embrace that Marina could barely breathe. And she heard him whisper against her hair, his voice choked with emotion, the words she needed to hear more than anything in the world. "I love you." "My God, Marina, I love you so much I don't know what to do with it." They stood there, embracing in the middle of the living room, while London continued its frantic life outside, indifferent to the small miracle happening in that Kensington Gardens apartment. And for the first time since it all began, Marina felt that maybe, just maybe, it really could work out. But fate, Marina was about to discover, had other plans. Happiness, Marina was learning, was a fragile thing. It could be built brick by brick with patience and care. But it only took one gust of wind to see everything crumble. And the gust arrived on a September morning, when autumn began to tinge the trees with orange tones, and the air became fresher, cleaner, as if the city itself was taking a deep breath before a deep dive. Marina had gone to the apartment to fetch some documents she had forgotten. It was mid-morning, Roderick was at work, and she took advantage of her lunch break to make a quick trip home. Home. It was funny how that word had become natural, as if the apartment had always been hers, as if it had always belonged to both of them. She was looking for the papers in Roderick's study, a room he rarely locked, and where Marina occasionally went to use the printer, when she accidentally knocked over a folder leaning against the desk. Documents scattered across the floor like dry leaves carried by the wind. Marina bent down to pick them up, mentally apologizing for the mess, when her eyes landed on something that made her heart stop. It was a photograph. Of her, but it wasn't a recent photo. It was months ago, maybe even a year. Marina was at the city council. She could see the setting in the background. She recognized the blue dress she had worn that day. She was holding a folder, gesturing, clearly in the middle of a presentation, and there was something written on the back of the photo, handwriting she didn't recognize. Marina Costa, architect, 22 years old, Panorama Architecture Office. Her hands trembled. She continued to rummage through the fallen papers, and it was like opening Pandora's box. There were more photos, several, of her leaving work, of her having coffee at a cafe near Oxford Street, of her entering the underground, all with dates noted on the back, some from 8 months ago, others from 6, others from just 3 months before the wedding. And then she found the reports. They were official documents, detailed investigations, her complete academic record from university, employment records, her family's bank history, each debt listed with surgical precision, contracts she had never seen, agreements signed between Roderick's company and her family's creditors, all dated months before the marriage proposal. Everything planned, everything calculated, everything coldly orchestrated. Marina felt bile rise in her throat. Her hands still held the documents, but it was as if they weren't her hands, as if her body had disconnected from reality. She reread the dates, reread the details, and the truth materialized before her, like a horrendous creature emerging from the darkness. Roderick hadn't seen her by chance at that presentation at the city council. He had chosen her, investigated her, followed her, studied every aspect of her life, waited for the exact moment when she would be most vulnerable, most desperate, and then made the proposal, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. No, a voice screamed inside her. It's not like that. He loves you. You know he loves you. But did she really know? Or was it just another illusion, another piece carefully placed on the board by someone who always knew exactly how to play? Marina didn't realize she was crying until she felt tears drip onto the documents, staining the ink. She tried to breathe, but the air wouldn't reach her lungs. The apartment, which minutes ago seemed like a home, was now a prison. The walls closed in around her, suffocating, accusing. She didn't know how long she spent there, sitting on the office floor, surrounded by the wreckage of a truth she would have preferred not to have discovered. When she finally managed to get up, her legs were numb, her whole body ached as if she had been beaten. She put everything back in the folder, the way it was, or at least tried to. She couldn't stop trembling. She picked up the documents she had gone to fetch, but she no longer knew why she needed them. She left the apartment in a state of shock, went down the elevator without seeing anything, crossed the lobby like a ghost. The doorman said something she didn't hear. She was deaf to everything but the deafening noise of her own thoughts. She didn't go back to work. She called saying she wasn't feeling well, which wasn't a lie. She walked aimlessly through the streets of Kensington Gardens, then along the City of London, lost in the crowd of hurried executives who paid no attention to another person in an existential crisis. London was good for that, for swallowing personal dramas as if they were just another grain of sand on the metropolis's infinite beach. She ended up on a bench in Primrose Hill, watching young people with their dogs, couples dating, children running. Life went on. The world kept turning. And she was there, sitting, feeling as if the ground had disappeared completely. Her phone rang several times. Roderick. She didn't answer. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know how to start that conversation. Did you investigate me, follow me, plan every step of our meeting as if I were a business project? The questions burned in her throat, but she couldn't form the words. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with pink and orange hues that on any other day she would find beautiful, Marina finally gathered the courage to return. She needed answers. She deserved answers. Roderick was in the apartment. She saw by his gaze as soon as she entered that he knew. Perhaps he had seen the mess in the office. Perhaps he simply knew from her expression. He was in the living room, still in his suit, but his tie was thrown on the sofa, and the first buttons of his shirt were open. He looked 10 years older, exhausted, defeated. You saw, he said. It wasn't a question. I saw, Marina confirmed, her voice cold, distant. I saw the photos. I saw the reports. I saw everything. The silence that followed was so heavy that Marina found it difficult to breathe. Roderick ran his hand over his face, a tired gesture of someone who knew there was no escape. Marina, I can explain, he began. Explain? Her voice rose sharp. Explain what exactly? How you followed me for months without my knowing. How you investigated every detail of my life. How you manipulated my family's situation to put me in a position where I would have no choice but to accept your proposal. Which part of that do you think needs explaining? He recoiled as if he had been slapped. It wasn't like that, he said, his voice desperate. It wasn't manipulation. I just wanted to help. I wanted to have you nearby. Have me nearby? Marina laughed, but it was a bitter, humorless laugh. As if I were something you could just acquire. You're so used to buying everything in your life that you thought you could buy me too. No. Roderick took a step towards her, but Marina recoiled. It wasn't about buying. It never was. It was about fear. Fear of getting close again, of taking a risk, of simply coming up to you and saying, hello, I'm interested. I didn't know how to do that, Marina. I spent so long alone, so long hidden behind the walls I built, that when I saw you, when I felt something different for the first time in years, I panicked. And yes, I did everything wrong. I investigated too much. I planned too much. I tried to control a situation that should never be controlled. But everything I did, however wrong it was because I was terrified of losing the chance to know you. Marina shook her head, tears returning. You don't understand, she whispered. You took away my choice. From the beginning, you took away my ability to decide freely. Because how can I know if what I feel is real when everything was built on a lie? How do I know if I love you or if I was conditioned to love you? The words fell between them like bombs. Roderick paled, staggered, had to lean on the back of the sofa. You don't know if you love me, he repeated, his voice broken. I don't know, Marina admitted, and it was the most honest thing she said that night. I don't know anything anymore. Roderick nodded slowly as if each movement hurt. Then he was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the floor, his breathing heavy. When he spoke again, his voice was low, defeated. You're right. About everything. I was selfish, manipulative, pathetic. I tried to buy something priceless. And in the process, I hurt the only person who truly mattered. So I understand if you want to leave, if you want to end this now, before the deadline. I'll arrange everything. I'll make sure you leave this with more than promised. I'll do whatever it takes for you to start over away from me and all this mess I created. Marina felt a lump in her throat. Was that what she wanted? To leave to end everything? Part of her screamed yes, that she should run out of that apartment and never look back. But another part, that stubborn and passionate part that had allowed herself to believe in them, hesitated. I need time, she said finally. I need to think. I need to understand what I really feel without you around, confusing everything. Roderick nodded, and there was so much pain in his eyes that Marina almost changed her mind. Almost. How much time do you need? He asked. I don't know, Marina replied, but I can't stay here while I decide. That same night, Marina packed her bags. She didn't take everything, just the essentials. Roderick stayed locked in his room, respecting her space, but Marina could feel his presence, could imagine his suffering on the other side of the door. And it hurt. God, how it hurt. Julia welcomed her without asking questions. She prepared the guest room, made tea, and simply stayed there, holding Marina's hand as she cried, as she unburdened herself, as she tried to understand how something so beautiful had turned into something so painful. You still love him, Julia said after Marina finally stopped talking. It wasn't a question. I do, Marina admitted, her voice hoarse from crying, and that makes everything worse. Because I wanted to be able to simply hate him. I wanted to be able to see him as a villain, as someone who used me. But I can't, because I saw the side of him that no one else sees. I saw the scared and lonely man behind the mask. And part of me understands why he did what he did, even knowing it was wrong. Julia squeezed her hand. So what are you going to do? I don't know. Marina rested her head on her friend's shoulder. Honestly, I don't know. The following days were a blur. Marina went to work on autopilot, returned to Julia's apartment, spent sleepless nights staring at the ceiling. Roderick tried to call a few times at first, but then stopped, respecting the space she had asked for. But he sent messages. Not long messages, not dramatic declarations, just small things. A photo of a flower he saw on the way that reminded him of the ones Marina cared for. A news item about an urban revitalization project he thought she'd be interested in. A simple good morning when the sun rose. Marina didn't reply, but she read every message. She kept every word as if they were precious treasures. It was in the second week that something happened that changed everything. Marina was at work when she received a call from her mother. Her voice was strange, tense, worried. Marina, I need to tell you something. It's about the debts. What debts, Mum? Marina frowned. The debts were paid. Roderick took care of everything. Yes, her mother confirmed. But I found out how he did it. Daughter, he didn't just pay the debts. He bought them. All of them. Months before he made the proposal to you. And not only that, he renegotiated deadlines with the creditors, held up ongoing lawsuits, made agreements that bought us time. Time for you to get married, and for him to officially resolve everything without raising suspicion. Marina, he was protecting our family months before you even knew he existed. Marina was silent, processing the information. It doesn't make sense, she said. Why would he do that? Why go so far? Because he cared, her mother replied, her voice choked. Marina, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went to his company today. I talked to him. And daughter, that man is devastated. But do you know what he told me? He said he doesn't regret anything he did to protect you, to protect our family. That his only regret is not having been honest from the beginning, and that if he could go back, he would do everything differently. But even with all the mistakes, every moment by your side was worth it. Marina felt tears begin to fall again. Mum, I don't know what to do. I think you do know, dear, her mother said softly. You always knew. You're just afraid to admit it. After she hung up, Marina sat at her desk for a long time. Colleagues passed by, spoke to her, but it was as if she was in a bubble, separated from the rest of the world. She thought about everything that had happened, the photos, the reports, Roderick's mistakes, but she also thought about the dinners, the conversations, the laughter, the mornings waking up and knowing there was someone there who cared, the small kindnesses he did without expecting anything in return, the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And she thought of something her mother had once said when Marina was a teenager and had come home crying because a boy she liked had hurt her. Daughter, her mother had said, stroking her hair, people will disappoint you. They will hurt you. But true love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about recognizing the mistake, asking for forgiveness, and doing things differently from then on. It's about choosing the person every day, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Marina picked up her phone. Before she could change her mind, she typed a message to Roderick. We need to talk. I'm coming over. The reply came in seconds. He'll be waiting. Marina asked for the rest of the day off work, called a ride-sharing app, and throughout the journey to Kensington Gardens, her heart beat so hard she was sure the driver could hear it. She didn't know exactly what she was going to say. She didn't have a prepared speech. She just knew she needed to see Roderick. She needed to look into his eyes and make a decision once and for all. When the elevator opened on the apartment floor, Marina felt her legs tremble. She rang the doorbell even though she had a key, because that space no longer felt like hers. The door opened almost immediately, as if Roderick had been waiting on the other side. He was different. Thinner, his face marked by deep dark circles, unshaven. He looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping, who hadn't been eating properly. He looked like someone punishing himself. Hi, he said, his voice hoarse. Hi, Marina replied. They stood there for a moment that seemed to stretch into an eternity. Then Marina entered, past him, and went straight to the living room. She needed distance to be able to speak without throwing herself into his arms. Roderick closed the door, but leaned against it, maintaining the space she clearly needed. I spoke with my mother today, Marina began, her voice firmer than she expected. She told me about the debts, about how you bought them months before making the proposal. Roderick swallowed hard but didn't avert his gaze. It's true. I did that. Why? Marina asked. Why go so far? Because when I discovered your family's situation, when I learned that you were desperate, that lawsuits were underway, that everything was falling apart, I panicked, he admitted. I thought that if I didn't do something quickly, you might have to make drastic decisions. You might accept anything from anyone. And the idea of someone taking advantage of your vulnerability, of someone hurting you when you were fragile, drove me crazy. So I acted. I bought the debts, held up the lawsuits, bought time. Not to manipulate you, but to protect you while I gathered the courage to finally approach you. Marina felt tears rise again. And the marriage proposal? She asked. Was that the only way you could think of? It was the only way I thought you would accept, Roderick replied, his voice filled with regret. Because I had nothing to offer but money. I wasn't young, I wasn't charming, I wasn't anything a woman like you deserved. So I created an agreement. A contract. Something safe with a defined term, without emotional risks. I thought that way you would accept. And then during the year I could try to win you over for real. Show that I was worth it. But Marina, I swear on everything sacred, I never imagined I would fall in love like this. That I would feel this. That you would become the most important thing in my life. Marina closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely. You made mistakes, Roderick, she said. Many mistakes. You took away my autonomy. You manipulated the situation. You made choices for my life without asking me. And that hurts. It hurts in a way I don't know if it will ever fully heal. I know, he whispered, his own voice choked. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. If you let me. Marina opened her eyes and stared at him. But do you know what hurts even more? She asked, her voice trembling. It's realizing that even with all the mistakes, even with all the manipulation, I still love you. And I can't imagine my life without you in it." Roderick's eyes widened as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Marina crossed the room until she stood before him. "I'm angry with you," she said. "I'm hurt. I'm confused. And it will take time for me to trust you completely again. But I also know that you're not perfect. No one is. And that love isn't about finding someone who will never disappoint you. It's about finding someone who is worth forgiving, someone who is willing to change, to grow, to do better. And I really think, you are that person." Roderick let the tears fall without trying to hide them. "Forgive me?" he asked, his voice broken. "Please, Marina, give me a chance to make this right." Marina touched his face, wiping his tears with her thumb. "I'm already forgiving you," she whispered. "But you need to promise me one thing." "Anything," he said, holding her hand against his face as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Promise that from now on, we do this together. No secrets, no manipulations, no trying to protect me from everything. We face things side by side as true partners, because I don't want to be saved, Roderick. I want to be loved. And there's a huge difference between the two. I promise," he said, and then pulled her into such a tight embrace that Marina felt as if she had finally come home. "I promise I will spend every day showing you that you made the right choice, that I will be the man you deserve." They stood there embracing in the middle of the living room, while the sun set outside and the city lights began to blink. And for the first time in weeks, Marina felt peace. A fragile peace still, a peace that would need to be cared for, nurtured, protected. But it was real. And it was theirs. But neither Marina nor Roderick knew that the biggest test was just beginning. That fate had prepared one last trial, one that would put everything they had built to the test in ways neither of them could imagine. The months following their reconciliation were different from anything Marina had imagined. It wasn't a fairy tale where everything magically resolved itself with a kiss and a declaration of love. It was work. Hard, honest, sometimes painful work, of rebuilding trust brick by brick, of learning to communicate without fear, of facing together the ghosts that still haunted their relationship. Roderick changed, not all at once but gradually, like someone relearning to live after years on autopilot. He began to share more, to talk about his fears, his insecurities, about the moments when the urge to control everything returned, and he consciously had to choose to trust instead of trying to manipulate. He opened the company's finances to Marina, not because she asked, but because he wanted her to know exactly where she stood. He introduced her to his partners, to his oldest employees, to the people who had been part of his life for decades, and when Marina suggested couples therapy, he accepted without hesitation, even though he was visibly uncomfortable in the first sessions. Marina also changed. She learned to communicate her needs instead of harboring resentments. She learned the difference between forgiving and forgetting, understanding that she could do the former without needing to do the latter. And most importantly, she learned to trust her own judgment, to believe that her choices were valid even when the world around questioned them. Because the world questioned. My goodness, how it questioned. There were malicious comments on social media when Roderick finally made their relationship public, introducing Marina as his wife at business events. There were whispers at business dinners, judgmental glances, veiled questions about the age difference. There was even an article on a gossip site, speculating about financial interest, about shady deals, painting Marina as an opportunist and Roderick as a foolish old man. Marina cried when she read it. Cried with anger, with frustration, with injustice. But Roderick held her, wiped her tears, and said something she would never forget. Let them talk. Let the whole world have an opinion. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is what exists within these four walls, between the two of us. And that, Marina, no one can take away from us. It was also around this time that Marina began to work on her own project. Encouraged by Roderick, she decided to open her own architecture firm, focused on revitalizing public spaces in underprivileged communities. It was an old dream, a desire she had harbored for years but had never had the courage or resources to pursue. Roderick offered investment, but Marina refused. She wanted to do it on her own 2 feet, with the money she had saved, with loans she would negotiate herself. She needed to prove to herself that she was capable. The office started small, just her and an intern, in a rented room in Notting Hill, but projects began to appear. A renovated playground in Brixton, a revitalized square in Tottenham. Each completed work was a victory, proof that she was not just the wife of a rich businessman, but a competent professional, with her own voice and clear vision. Roderick attended all the inaugurations. He stood in the back, discreet, but with a smile of pride so wide that Marina could see it from afar. And then at home, he would ask her to recount every detail, every challenge overcome, every moment of satisfaction. He listened as if they were the most fascinating stories in the world. It was in one of those moments of everyday happiness, on an ordinary Tuesday in November, that everything changed. Roderick had a trip scheduled to rural Yorkshire. The company was negotiating the purchase of a weaving mill in Leicester, and he needed to go personally to close the deal. Marina offered to go along, to keep him company. But he said it would be boring, endless meetings with lawyers and accountants, and that she should take the opportunity to catch up on work. They said goodbye at the apartment door on a cloudy morning. A quick kiss, a casual farewell, no premonition that it would be the last moment of normalcy for a long time. Marina was at the office when she received the call. It was an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her take the call. "Hello, Marina Alastair Sandon?" A male voice, formal, controlled. "Yes, this is she," Marina replied, feeling a chill run down her spine. "This is St. Thomas's Hospital, Cambridge. Are you Roderick Alastair Sandon's wife?" The world stopped. Marina felt her phone slip from her hand, had to hold it with both hands to keep it from falling. "Yes," she managed to say, her voice a strangled whisper. "What happened?" "There was an incident on the M1 motorway. The vehicle Mr. Sandon was in was involved in a collision. He was brought here about an hour ago. Could you please come as quickly as possible?" Marina doesn't remember exactly how she got to the hospital. She remembers calling Julia, asking her to close the office. She remembers calling a rideshare driver and begging him to go as fast as possible. She remembers the M1 motorway blurring past the window as she prayed, bargained with God, with the universe, with any higher power that was listening. "Please, please, please." The word repeated in her mind like a desperate mantra. St. Thomas's Hospital was a labyrinth of white corridors, antiseptic smells and the incessant beeping of machines. Marina ran to the reception, gave Roderick's name, was directed to the third floor to a waiting room where the doctor would come to speak with her. She waited. Every minute was an eternity, every second a torture. When the doctor finally appeared, a middle-aged man with deep dark circles under his eyes and a stained lab coat, Marina stood up so quickly she felt dizzy. "How is he?" The words came out rushed, desperate. The doctor motioned for her to sit down. It was never a good sign when they asked you to sit down. "Your husband suffered a traumatic brain injury, fractured ribs and some internal injuries," he explained, his voice professional but not devoid of empathy. "He's in surgery now. The team is doing everything they can. But you need to understand that the next 24 hours are critical. Very critical." Marina felt her legs give way. She sat down because she had no choice, because her body simply couldn't stand anymore. "Will he be okay?" she asked, even knowing it was a foolish question, that no one could guarantee anything. "We are doing everything we can," the doctor repeated. "He's a strong man. That helps. But now it's a matter of waiting. Waiting." Marina hated that word. The following hours were a blur of bad machine coffee, of phone calls to Roderick's family, whom he rarely mentioned, but who appeared as soon as they knew, of nurses who passed by offering empty words of comfort. Julia arrived at some point, sat next to Marina, held her hand without saying anything, because there was nothing to say. It was during that endless wait, sitting in an uncomfortable, hard plastic chair, that Marina understood something fundamental. She understood that all the anger she had felt, all the hurts, all the questions about manipulation and control and trust, all of that didn't matter. Not really, because in the end, the only thing that mattered was that Roderick was okay, that he would come back to her, that she would have another chance to wake up next to him, to argue about who would do the dishes, to hear him humming in the shower, to smell him on the pillow. She understood that love is not about who was wrong or who was right. It's about choosing the person every day despite everything. Exactly as her mother had said. The surgery lasted 6 hours. When the doctor finally emerged, still in surgical scrubs, Marina stood up with her heart pounding so hard it hurt. "The surgery was successful," he said, and Marina felt her knees almost buckle with relief. "We managed to stabilize the internal injuries, reduce the pressure on the skull, but he is still in a very delicate condition. He will need to stay in the ICU for the next few days, and when he wakes up, it will be a long recovery process. But he will wake up," Marina said. It wasn't a question. It was almost an order, as if she could force the universe to obey through sheer willpower. "The signs are good," the doctor confirmed. "You can see him in a little while, but only for a few minutes." When they finally let Marina into the ICU, nothing in the world could have prepared her for the sight of Roderick in that bed. He seemed smaller, more fragile, connected to tubes and wires and machines that beeped and breathed for him. There were bandages covering part of his head, purple bruises spread across his face, and a sickly pallor that made Marina have to suppress a sob. She approached slowly, as if afraid of breaking him with a sudden movement. She took his hand, which was cold, heavy, lifeless, and she began to speak. "Roderick, it's me, Marina. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Do you hear me? You need to fight. You need to come back, because we still have so much ahead of us. We still have that trip to the Hamptons you promised. I still have to teach you how to dance properly, because you're terrible at it. We still have to finish reading that book we started together, and that you kept complaining was boring, but I know you were loving it. You can't leave, not now. Not when we've finally sorted things out." Her voice faltered, tears falling freely. "Please," she whispered, "please, Roderick, come back to me." The machines continued beeping, indifferent. Roderick remained motionless, unconscious, too far away to hear. Marina spent the next 3 days practically living at the hospital. Julia brought clean clothes, food that Marina barely touched. Her mother arrived by bus from Croydon, stayed by her daughter's side, prayed endless rosaries in a low voice. The doctors updated his condition every few hours. Stable, that was the word they used. Stable, but still critical. On the third night, Marina was alone in the private room where they had finally managed to transfer Roderick after he left the ICU. There were still machines, still risks, but at least she could stay there all the time. She could hold his hand. She could speak without a time limit. She was almost dozing in the armchair beside the bed when she heard it. A low, hoarse, somewhat muffled sound. Her eyes opened immediately. She looked at the bed and saw Roderick stirring, his head turning slowly, his eyes beginning to open, heavy, confused. "Roderick!" Marina jumped from the armchair, ran to the bed, took his hand. "Roderick, you're awake. You're okay. Wait, I'll call the doctor." But before she could press the call button, he squeezed her hand. A weak squeeze, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She looked at him and saw that his eyes were focused on her now, recognizing her. "Marina," his voice came out hoarse, almost inaudible, but it was him. It was his voice. "I'm here," she said, tears returning, but this time of pure relief. "I'm here. You're in the hospital. You had an accident. But you're okay. You'll be okay." He tried to speak again, but began to cough. Marina quickly grabbed a glass of water with a straw that the nurse had left, helped him drink small sips. Then he spoke again, each word a visible effort. "I thought," he began, breathing with difficulty between words, "I thought I wouldn't see you again." Marina felt her heart break. She shook her head, holding his hand with both hands. "You promised me," she whispered. "You promised you would spend every day showing me that choosing you was worth it. And you can't keep that promise if you're not here." Roderick managed something that might have been a smile, but it was more of a grimace of pain. "Sorry for scaring you." Marina laughed, but it was a tear-soaked laugh. "You're not forgiven for that. I'll never forgive you for making me so terrified. Then I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it," he said, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that cut through all the pain, all the medications, all the exhaustion. "I love you, Marina, in case it wasn't clear yet." "I love you too," she replied, leaning in to kiss his forehead carefully, avoiding the bandages. "More than anything in this world." The doctors rushed in when Marina finally pressed the call button. They performed tests, evaluations, confirmed that everything was within expectations. Roderick would have a long recovery road ahead, but the worst had passed. He was out of danger. The following weeks were of intensive physiotherapy, of relearning basic movements, of dealing with constant pain and the frustration of a body that didn't obey as before. But Marina was there every step of the way, literally. She held his arm when he tried to walk down the corridor. She massaged his tense muscles when the pain became unbearable. She read to him when his vision was still too blurry for him to read alone. She simply stayed there holding his hand, when all he needed was to know he wasn't alone. And Roderick fell in love with her again. Or perhaps it would be more correct to say that he fell even more deeply in love, in a way he didn't know was possible. Because it's one thing to love someone in happy moments, in victories, in laughter. It's an entirely different thing to love someone who sees you at your worst, vulnerable, weak, dependent, and chooses to stay anyway. 2 months after the accident, Roderick was finally discharged. They returned to the apartment on a sunny January day. Marina had hired a cleaning company to leave everything spotless. There were fresh flowers in every room, and the fridge was full of all his favorite foods. While Roderick settled on the sofa, still moving carefully, Marina went to the study. She opened a specific drawer, took out something that had been stored there, and returned to the living room. "Roderick, I need to show you something," she said. He looked curious as she sat beside him and placed an envelope in his hands. "Open it," Marina asked. Roderick opened the envelope with movement still a little slow due to his injuries. From inside, he took out several papers. It took him a second to recognize what they were. When he did, he turned pale. It was the contract. The original marriage contract. The 12 pages that defined the terms of their agreement, with all the clauses, all the deadlines, everything meticulously detailed. But there was something different. Each page was torn in half, and over the pieces, Marina had pasted a photo of the two of them. Photos taken over the past few months, laughing in the kitchen, embracing on the balcony, looking at each other with that gaze that needs no words. "What is this?" Roderick asked, his voice choked. "It's the end of the contract," Marina said simply, "and the beginning of us for real." "Roderick, when you were in that hospital, when I thought I might lose you, I realized that that paper never meant anything. From the very first day, from that whisper on our wedding night, this has always been real. It was always more than an agreement. It was always love." She took his hand, intertwined their fingers. "So I want to do this again, the right way. I want to renew our vows, not in a cold registry office, but surrounded by people we love. I want to wear a real dress, not one I chose in a hurry. I want to dance with you, even if you dance terribly. I want to celebrate what we have, not what we signed." Roderick stared at the destroyed contract, at the photos pasted over the pieces, at the extraordinary woman sitting beside him. And for the second time since he had met her, he cried. "Marina," he managed to say through tears, "you have no idea what it means to hear that. I spent so long thinking I didn't deserve you, that one day you would wake up and realize you made a mistake. And now you're here, voluntarily, choosing to stay, choosing to make this real. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I swear I will spend every remaining day of my life honoring that choice." Marina smiled, wiping his tears with her thumb. "You saved me, Roderick. Not just financially, not just by solving problems. You saved me from a life where I was just surviving. You taught me that it's possible to truly love, with fear and insecurity and everything else, but still love. You gave me a home. You gave me purpose. You gave me you, and it was the best thing that ever happened in my life." They kissed there on the living room sofa, surrounded by the wreckage of a contract that should never have existed, and by the promises of a future they would build together, without agreements, without deadlines, with nothing but pure and true love. The vow renewal ceremony took place 3 months later, in a beautiful garden in rural Yorkshire, near the farm where Roderick had spent his childhood summers. It was small, intimate, only close family and dear friends. Marina wore a delicate lace dress she chose with her mother, spending hours in ateliers until she found the perfect one. Roderick wore a classic suit, but this time without the armor, without the masks, just himself, vulnerable and happy. When they exchanged the vows they had written together, there wasn't a single person present who wasn't crying. Roderick promised honesty, partnership, and unconditional love. He promised to make fewer mistakes, listen more, and never again try to control the uncontrollable. Marina promised patience, understanding, and the courage to always tell the truth even when it hurt. She promised to build a life with him, not alongside him, but together, intertwined, inseparable. And when the minister said, "You may kiss the bride," Roderick pulled her into a kiss that was Promise and celebration and gratitude all rolled into one. A kiss that said thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for saving me from myself. The party extended into the night. There was dancing, yes, and Roderick danced badly as Marina had predicted, but she didn't care. There were emotional speeches, laughter, hugs. Marina's mother held Roderick's hands and said he was the son she never had. Julia pulled Marina aside and said she was proud of her, that she had found not only love, but had found herself in the process. When the night finally ended, and they returned to the room they had reserved in a charming inn near the party venue, Marina and Roderick stood on the balcony, watching the stars twinkle in a sky free of light pollution. In no hurry to sleep, in no hurry for anything. "You know what's funny?" Marina said, leaning against his chest as he hugged her from behind. "A year ago I was terrified. I thought I was selling my life for 12 months. And now I look back and realize I was actually buying the rest of it." Roderick kissed the top of her head. "Best investment I ever made," he joked, and Marina lightly elbowed his ribs, making them both laugh. They stayed there for a while longer in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. And Marina thought about how strange life was, how the most winding paths sometimes led to the most perfect destinations, how sometimes you have to get completely lost to finally find yourself. Years later, when Marina and Roderick looked back, they would see that that absurd contract, that impossible agreement, was just the beginning of something much bigger. They saw Marina's architecture firm grow, become a reference in social projects, win awards, make a difference in the lives of thousands of people. They saw Roderick transform, from a lonely and controlling businessman into a man who knew how to ask for help, who knew how to say, "I don't know," who knew how to simply be present. They saw their family grow in ways they never imagined, with joint projects, with trips around the world, with moments of pure daily happiness that are the true meaning of a life well lived. And when night finally came, when the day ended, and they lay side by side in the bed that was now truly theirs, without contracts, without agreements, just love, Roderick sometimes whispered the same words he had said on their first night, "Trust me." And Marina every day responded in the same way, not with words but with the choice to stay, to love, to build, because trust is not asked for, it is earned. And they had earned it together, through trials and errors, through pain and healing, through fear and courage. And in the end, they discovered that true love is not about never falling. It's about always getting up together, always.